Here to provide perspective on the minimum wage issue and also the DFL tax bills, we have Senate Minority Leader David Hann. Thanks for joining us, Senator.
Good to be here.
Always good to have you. Let's begin with minimum wage. It's essentially resolved, but it's no longer a conference committee report. So does the Senate GOP have kind of a strategy going into the floor session? Will you try to amend this bill?
Well, we don't know yet. Clearly, we don't have votes to do anything that the majority doesn't want to do, so it is something we're going to talk about. But I think this whole issue of minimum wage is another example of what we think is of a partisan approach to dealing with important issues. There are Republicans, and one of our members, at least one, has had a bill that has been sitting in committee without getting a hearing that would increase the minimum wage to the federal guideline standard currently, which is about a 20% increase. Never got a hearing. So there are things that we could work together on, but the majority party hasn't really been interested in pursuing that course. So we will get a bill. I'm not sure yet what kind of amendments we will offer, if any. Obviously, we're not going to win any of those amendments if the majority doesn't want to see them happen.
What change would you like to see made if you had that power?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think the biggest thing is the automatic inflationary index. We think that is problematic. I don't think we should do anything that takes control away from the legislature and turns it over to some independent mechanism to provide an automatic increase in something like this. I think it should be done, if at all, deliberately by a vote of the legislature. So that concerns us. I think, too, there are concerns about the level of the increase. Going to $9.50 is, I think, high. I've seen surveys that say that most of the people in the state don't support an increase to that amount. We think that will have a negative effect on businesses, particularly border communities. So there are things of that nature that we are concerned about, that we would certainly like to see a different kind of structure offered. I don't think we're going to see that because I believe there's been an agreement reached. But part of this debate, we've been focusing on minimum wage. We really should be talking about what kind of opportunities we're providing for people in the state to have jobs, to grow businesses, and those are things that are being neglected.
Okay, to that point, some of those opportunities really come through business growth. The Senate DFL is taking an approach with this tax bill to try to provide some tax relief for small businesses. Let's talk a little bit about the DFL bills at this point. Do you think they do enough for small businesses and middle-class Americans, Minnesotans?
Well, the first point is, and I think we shouldn't forget this, is that we just had a big budget pass last year that was over a $2 billion tax increase, along with a better than 10% increase in spending, which on our side, we said that's excessive. We shouldn't do that. That will hurt the economy. And sure enough, in the interim period of time, there have been a lot of pressure, a lot of voices saying repeal some of those business taxes and some of those ones that hurt our ability to be competitive. And we did do that, which I think was a good thing, at least partially. And I think that the other part of this, with the surplus so-called, our position has been we should return that money to the economy. We shouldn't be just looking at ways to spend that here at the state level. So I think anything that we can do that will provide an opportunity to return those excess dollars, that so-called surplus money, back into the economy, back into the pockets of the people of the state is a good thing. Now, we'll have to see what kind of details in the second tax bill they'll provide.
And to that point, more than $700 million is going back to taxpayers in between, between the two bills in some way, shape, or form, and the budget reserves are also increased. So the DFL argues that giving it all back, as you have suggested, kind of puts the state in a vulnerable position. So, especially if there's another recession. To that point, I see from your face that you do not buy that argument.
Well, no, not at all. When we talk about putting money in reserves, and we already have, prior to any of this being done, about $1 billion in reserves already mandated by state law. So the question is that enough? And I don't know. There's probably arguments you could make. But here's the point. Reserves are really deferred spending. Do we really need to do that? And if we would manage our spending and our budget, our state budget, in a more reasonable way, not overspending the growth of the economy, for example, then the need to have reserves would be far less than what they are. But just last year, we had a 10% increase in spending, and now with the bill that was passed recently, that's going to grow to about 11%. You can't have that level of growth in spending and not find problems somewhere along the way. You're going to have difficulty finding ways to pay for that. That's where the focus ought to be. How do we manage the spending in this state so it doesn't outgrow the pace of the economy? If we did that, the debate about reserves would be moot. We really should be thinking about not building the state reserves, but helping people, helping businesses build the reserves in their own economies.
Senator, we're just about out of time, but when the legislature returns from Easter Passover break, there will be about a month less, give or take. Just give me a perspective on session thus far and what you expect in this last month or so?
Well, so far, I think we've seen a lot of partisan bills, a lot of approaches to problems that are significant and large and should require bipartisan agreement. The bullying bill, certainly the new Senate office building, I think minimum wage, all those things were done in a very partisan way without looking at or expecting or trying to get any Republican input into those things. I think that's a huge problem. Going forward, I think the only thing that is really left to do is to try to do something on the bonding bill, and we've agreed to help do that.
And you have, okay. I was going to ask you, that obviously needs bipartisan support. Is that agreement still in place?
It's still in place. We had a handshake agreement with the legislative leaders of all parties in both houses to kind of keep the level of bonding over the 2-year biennium to be $1 billion. That leaves us about $850 million to do this year. I think the real challenge is what fits into that $850 million bucket, and reaching agreement on that I think might take a little bit of time, but I'm sure we'll find a way to do it.
Okay, with those words, Senator David Hann, as always, thanks for joining us in the studio.